I'm Carole. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Tree of Life. I think if I were going to be giving this presentation 3 days ago, it might have sounded a little different because I've been hearing a lot about people who are telling their story. This is actually not my story. I'm the shepherd for for a community story. It's my story in that I'm an American Jew. It's my story in that after October 27th, 2018, many of us American Jews felt that we were no longer safe in America. It's my story in that American Jewish life shifted after this shooting. But it is not my story in that I didn't live in Pittsburgh. I went to Pittsburgh to build this institution. And that's particularly important because of the sensitivity that it takes to tell someone else's story and the listening that was necessary in even getting to a place where we could begin, how do we tell this story? So, how many of you have heard about the Tree of Life or that even means anything? Okay. So, if it's okay, what I'd like to do is begin with what happened. On October 27th, 2018, 3 congregations, so 3 synagogues, were meeting in one building. They were none of them large congregations, they were all small. They were not meeting as a singular group, they were meeting individually as 3 different congregations in different spaces throughout the same building, a very big, old building. One of the congregations had a program about resettling Syrian refugees, which is key to the story. And it was a program by an organization called HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which had a history of resettling European Jews, and now work tirelessly to resettle refugees to America. So the program they were doing was about resettling Syrian refugees in Pittsburgh. The shooter chose the building because of that specifically. Not specifically only because they were Jews, but right-wing replacement theory. That these Syrian refugees, along with Jews, were going to replace white folk. That the way of life of whites in America would be challenged and destroyed by immigrant groups, including Jews. So the shooter entered the building and shot and killed 11 individuals, though there were others who were very badly hurt, and first responders, people who rushed in to help, who were also very badly hurt. So it's the story of what do you do with that space? How do you re-enter that space? And what makes sense? What's appropriate to do on a space of such tragedy? And there were no singular answer. So the space will include a memorial, and it was a really difficult decision for 11 families who had lost their loved ones to come together and decide where they wanted the memorial. Because some people didn't want it on this space. What should the memorial be? How do you ask for a unanimous decision among 11 very different families? And who pays for the memorial? What happens on that site? Also, what happens in the building? And should the building be torn down or not? And we had survivors and family members who could not get that building down fast enough, who said, I will never walk back in that building. Knock it down. put up an apartment building, put up an office building, stick a plaque there, we will never walk back in. And so it took a while to get to a place where most community members felt that there was some merit and validity in building something on the site. And then they hired an architect, who some of you in Berlin may know, Daniel Libeskind, who built the Jewish Museum here in Berlin, and among many other things, and an exhibition designer, and I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. So, and then I came in. Those decisions had already been made when I was hired. And just a little bit about myself, this is not the first building that I've built from the bottom up. So it's an incredible privilege, a blessing, and honor to have been selected. And I love working with architects and building communities. So this is different than anything I could have even imagined when I started. What's our mission? What are we going to do here? And how do you, in the darkest time for American Jews, puncture through that darkness with light? How do you bring light into such a terrible, terrible moment? So we began this process of reimagining the building. I'm gonna, if it's okay.
Can we change the mic?
I have to, sure.
Okay.
Is this okay? Oh, it's better, okay, good. I mentioned that there were people who said, I will never go back in this building, tear it down, put up an apartment building, put up a plaque. I don't want to ever be back in that building. My greatest moment actually was just maybe a month ago when I showed the designs that you're going to see of the building to a group of family members, one of whom survived next to her mother. She was under her mother. Her mother did not make it, and she was pulled out by the first responders, not clear whether she would make it. And she came up to me at the end of showing her the building design, tears flooding her face, and said, I walked out of that building alive, and I'm going to walk back in. And to me, that's what this is about. This is about creating a space where we will never allow ourselves to be defined by our killers, by our haters, and the word light and resilience is, you'll see over and over again. So maybe some of the Germans know who Mr. Rogers is. Are any of the Germans ever heard of Mr. Rogers? Okay, so Mr. Rogers had a famous children's television show where he really asked children to imagine that everybody is your neighbor and to think about a world of kindness. This synagogue happened to be literally Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. He is from Squirrel Hill. And what happened in the days and weeks and months after the shooting, the way the entire neighborhood came together, Muslims, Christians, the sports teams, I don't know the names of all the sports teams, the football team, in a tremendous hug and embrace. The Muslim community actually raised money for the funerals of each of the 11 victims. And if we can imagine a world where that's what our world can look like, to be Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. I started my position 2.5 years ago, and I would say I represent the worst, most violent act of anti-Semitism that has ever happened in America. And now I say, for now. For now. And let's hope it stays so. But in the time since I've begun, I could never have imagined how much worse it would have gotten. My hometown is not Pittsburgh, it's Washington, D.C. Just a short time ago, 2 individuals who were attending a program about peace, reconciliation, and working together were shot and killed outside of the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And since then, other terrible things have happened as well. throwing a Molotov cocktail into a group of Jews gathering peacefully in Boulder, Colorado. Our own governor's house was firebombed, Governor Shapiro, on the second day of Passover. So this is not the America that in 1790, George Washington sent a letter to the first Jews, first synagogue in America, let bigotry know no sanction. And we have far to go to make good on that promise. And how do we break through hate? I've been listening and learning from my colleagues from all over the United States and the work that they do on race, and how do we break through hate? And I think the tools that each of us have are the same, through knowing one another, through education, but first and foremost, acknowledging and remembering, educating, and how do we create bridges of empathy by knowing each other, by understanding, by educating. But to me, personally, the most important is by celebrating. And by, as I have just said, never letting our story end with our killers. That we not allow ourselves to be known as victims. So, yeah, I'm gonna use this super fancy pointer. Also, I apologize, it's a long time of just me. Tanya is not feeling well, so we'll open it up to questions and conversation. I promise you will not have to listen to me for an hour and a half. That would be really not fun. So, as I mentioned, we have already knocked down 80%. So everywhere from the end of this building forward is gone. We demolished it, so 80% of the building is gone. And this little piece here is the original sanctuary. The shooter was never in that space. So we kept that space. Everything beyond is a Daniel Libeskind design. So I want to stop for a minute and talk about my first day here. I got the key to the building, I walked in. Seemed like a normal thing, I just started, I should see the building. It was about the dumbest thing I could have done. I didn't understand because I'm not familiar with mass shootings and the damage that an automatic weapon can do. And sometimes I say that the building was the 12th victim. The building was sprayed throughout with bullet holes. Every place where victims had tried to protect themselves, you could see the destruction of the bullet holes. It was devastating for me. And I was part of the team that opened the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I've been to Auschwitz and I've been to other camps. I thought, this is a synagogue in America, I'll be okay. It was, so, for me personally, a far more difficult experience because America was supposed to be our golden land, as we say in Yiddish, the golden Medina, the place that everything is going to be okay. And here I walked into a synagogue to see the worst kind of destruction. At that point, I asked the board to stop the project, just stop, and remove all of the material in the building that had been impacted by the shooter. Kitchen cabinets, a kitchen island where two people were trying to protect themselves. We have to save all of this because to me it would be like as if we took Auschwitz and leveled it and somebody could say the Shoah, the Holocaust never happened. That somebody could ever say that this didn't happen. So we took about 5 months pause and brought in a crew, and above the doors it said in a marker, 2 victims, crossed out 3 where they found a 3rd victim. I saved all of that, all clear. And there was a shootout between the first responders and the killer in what was a Sunday school classroom. And on the walls of the Sunday school classroom where the little kids had been asked to write their 10 commandments, don't be nice to your sister, don't paper your neighbor's house, don't eat meat, and all of them, don't kill, don't murder, don't shoot, and bullet holes through them. Where the gunmen and the first responders had a skirmish. So all of that's been saved. But I could never have understood before I walked in what that might have felt like for me. So in fact, I stopped and I asked a colleague from the Holocaust Museum to please come to Pittsburgh and walk through with me. We also couldn't remove anything until there was a trial for this shooter. So we couldn't touch anything until after the trial and the verdict because it was all evidentiary material. And by the way, that was also not an easy time for the community because we're very divided over the death penalty. Uh-oh. Oh, it's my fault, I have it backwards. Okay. So, I want to show you a little bit of what the building will look like. Woo. So, it's a bit of an aerial view, that's the original sanctuary. Then there is what will be a gorgeous glass atrium that will connect the old part and this new building that has been designed by Daniel Libeskind. Here you can see that's the glass atrium. If you've been to the Jewish Museum in Berlin, it'll, I'm sure, look familiar to you. And again, we have a lot of green space. And if it's okay, I'll tell you, this is actually about the 8th design. This is the design we're building, but the original design was a bit different. And if there was no green space, it took up the entire footprint, and we shrunk the building by a little more than a third. Some of it had to do with cost, and a lot of it also had to do with what makes sense. And I felt really strongly that I wanted green space, that you could tent and you could have family programs and you could enjoy outdoor space as well. So, nothing's ever just like, oh, here we go, we're done. So, along with the building, there's also a memorial, which will be sort of hugging around the original building. This is the memorial space, and let me just stop and share a little bit about the memorial. Here were some of the questions. Survivors, are they included? No. First responders? No. Who designs the memorial? How do you get 11 families who are traumatized, they're trauma-informed, in all of their responses to agree to what a memorial should look like? And there were some very, very tense moments. We brought in a mediator, somebody to work with the families. I've had nothing to do with the design of the memorial. I shouldn't have anything to do with it. I don't attend those meetings. I hear about them after they've happened. They're closed, safe space conversations. So the design that they've ultimately come up with, that I think primarily everybody feels good about, is each of the victims will have a book, like in a stone book, and each of the family members of the victim will determine what they want written or inscribed in that book so that they are an individual memorial to each of the 11 victims. And the whole thing forms a garden. But it's been a very difficult process to get to that place. So I think I've done a lot of talking, and I'm gonna stop for a minute and ask, just to this place, are there questions, comments, thoughts?
Can you talk, who approached you to take this role? Or, I mean, I know your experience, but how did you come
So thank you. I'm operating on the assumption that we're all friends here. This is a very safe space. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life at a certain point, so I took a break. I gave myself a little spiritual sabbatical. I rented my house out, and I rented a little apartment in my favorite neighborhood in Jerusalem. And I signed up, well, I didn't exactly sign up, I applied and got into a 1-year program just to study in a rabbinical school. Not to be a rabbi, let's be clear, but to study. And I thought, I just want to drink a coffee, walk to class, and do nothing but think about something that has nothing to do really with my work. And that's where I was when I was approached about this position. But I will share with you, I was also unfortunately hit by a car. I was a pedestrian in Jerusalem and I was plowed down by a driver in an SUV. So I had just come out of the hospital. I was in the hospital for a few days. I had a traumatic brain injury. I was all smashed up, had a broken tooth. And I got recruited by a search firm that was trying to fill this position. So just a little bit humorously, they thought that I was very dour, that I wasn't friendly, because I didn't smile on the Zoom, because I had a broken tooth. I was trying so hard not to smile, and then I got some feedback that they think you're kind of sour, like they don't understand why you're not friendlier. And I was like, broken tooth. So I was interviewing for this position, and they wanted to fly me into Pittsburgh, of course, to meet this person who doesn't smile. And I couldn't fly because I was still recovering and needed the blood to be absorbed. So they waited actually for about another month until I was cleared to fly. So I flew to Pittsburgh and I interviewed, and because I had been hurt and because I was like, I'll take a break now, there were people in my life who begged me not to take this job. You've already done a lot. This is really hard. Just don't do it. But I'm going to answer you because there is a reason I took this job. I interviewed and I took it the next day. I laid my head down and I thought, my father was a liberator in World War II at Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. My father passed away more than 25 years ago. My brother is very sick. He has end-stage Parkinson's, cannot get out of bed on his own. And he was a paratrooper in the Israeli Defense Force in 1973. And I thought, is it too much to ask one kind of privileged girl to do the most you can in the face of the worst anti-Semitism in America? Am I going to sit this one out? No. When my niece and nephews asked me, what did you do in the face of the worst anti-Semitism? What did you do? Did you sit it out or did you sign on? So I moved to Pittsburgh 2 weeks later. Never imagining how much worse it would get.
It's sort of more a general question about memorials. You said the 11 survivor families made those decisions, but a memorial is supposed to also bring the larger community together, and it has to have meaning to the larger community, I feel. Or how should I say, isn't that, let's say, the Holocaust Memorial here in Berlin? It's for people to see what happened, not just for the survivors to memorialize what happened to them. So how do you bridge that?
I am so glad you asked that. That is such the key question that I think those of us who have been here are really struggling with. And there's a fundamental difference. They're trying to build a memorial and still in recovery. Mm-hmm. It's 3 years later, 2 years later, that they're working with the architect to design a memorial. The Peter Eisenman Memorial here happened a generation after the Shoah. It's very different. The 9/11 Museum opened 13 years after 9/11. And how do you create a space when you're still living it? Every day, you know, these families are in pain every day. And it's a different experience. I agree with you, of course. This memorial is for those who are remembering their loved ones, and it's for those of us who want to remember and reflect. And bringing that together has been very challenging.
I like the question. I was thinking something similar about, I wanted to know more about, because you spoke to this outpour from the community of support, and since, you know, I know, you know, you're still working on this and everything's not public, but what has the community support around the project looked like? And I just also wanted to say, like, you know, a lot of times to go from a family and family saying, I don't care, tear it down, to go to like, to be at a place where you repurpose and save the space, repurpose it in a way that we don't lose the space. You know, in the care that you've approached this with and the intentionality, I admire a lot. Just wanted to say that. But yeah, so what has the community support looked like?
If I had written questions and handed them out, they actually wouldn't have been as good because you're asking, obviously, the critical questions. And I came in, I thought everybody would be so happy to meet me. Here I am coming in to do this important work. And I couldn't understand why I was greeted with a level of hostility in a fair segment of the community. And I would show up at synagogue, the rabbi didn't want to meet me, the people in the congregation didn't want to meet me. I thought, why not? You don't even know me, I could be nice. And what I did not understand was the divisiveness of building this and how conflicted the Jewish community of Pittsburgh is and was about creating this. How much money should it cost? If I raise X amount of dollars, because in the United States, that's how these things get done, you have to raise private money, which you've talked about. If I'm out there raising money, then what happens to the kosher food for the elderly? This notion of scarcity, that whatever goes into this building will be that much less for other things. And can a building bring people back? So I decided to invoke Hillary Clinton, who went on a listening tour. And I said, I'm gonna just stop and go on a little listening tour. And I asked the people who were the most hostile to me, what's wrong? Why don't you like me? And I heard, I didn't like you before I met you. I never thought they should have hired you. They never should have hired Daniel Libeskind. What do we need somebody so expensive and famous for? And I heard all manner of things. I was called a Jewish carpetbagger, like someone who's come in and thought, well, that's a lot. And I very intentionally then began to show up at community events. Casino night, I've never been to a casino night. I went to every community event I could possibly handle as one individual, so that the community would know me, and I could know the space that I moved into. I was ill-prepared for the divide within the Jewish community around this building.
Has that gotten better?
Say it again?
Has it gotten better?
This is what I've heard, so I will take it as a yes. We're now meeting the authentic you. And I thought, well, no, I'm the same person, but you've come to know me. I am not a different person 2.5 years later, but I've had the time in the community, and you've given me the grace to get to know me. And I've spent time, which I'll talk about a little bit more, bringing different segments of the community together to meet with the academic advisory group that is helping me with this and to have their voices uplifted. So we've slowed the whole thing down. I also let go of the exhibition designer, which was a firm called Applebaum and Associates. They're a very big firm. They design USHMM, the United States Olympic, very big projects. And it was clear to me this was not the right match, because they were gonna come in and say, here's what we can do for you, which is exactly counter to the best way to do this, which is, what would you like to see? Mm-hmm. What voice do you want to hear? So I just last week, before I left to come here, put out a request for proposal to small, primarily single practitioner firms, and now ready 2.5 years later to think about an exhibition design firm that can work within the community as opposed to top down. So that was a super fun phone call to Ralph. Other questions, comments?
It's still an active synagogue.
So let me explain that on the day after the shooting, you could no longer enter the building for 2 reasons. The building was destroyed, and it was a crime scene. So all 3 of the congregations were rehoused in other synagogue buildings. The only congregation coming back when we reopen is the Tree of Life congregation. Not because they're not all welcome, but the others are happy where they are. They have no desire to come back in. And I don't have anything to do essentially with the Tree of Life congregation. I don't work for them. This is a new nonprofit, and we have a 99-year lease on that land, which is another really delicate, difficult relationship. Imagine suddenly your 80-year-old building that your grandparents were married in, you were married in, your child was married there, your child's bar mitzvah was there. You have no control over that space anymore. And it has taken, I meet with a mediator and my board president and a group of the congregation members. How do we navigate our relationship? Yeah, it's not easy to necessarily come in and understand, wait, you're not glad to have this gorgeous new facility being built? No, now we don't have any control. So it's a project that requires a lot of sensitivity.
So what do you imagine Jewish life looking like on this site in the future? And how is that a tension with your other goals?
So that is a bit of a tension with the congregation. For me, what I imagine Jewish life looking like, let me start with, I'm opposed to using Hebrew language in any building that is intentionally pluralistic and intended for everyone. So that there's never anything that somebody walking up to the building or into the building looks at and says, maybe I don't belong here. I don't know these letters, I don't know these words, maybe I don't belong here. So for me, let's start there, that what Jewish life here looks like is an absolutely open hand. And that Jewish values, customs, are human values and customs. They're not owned by Jews. And so how do we use Jewish values and customs in the most open and pluralistic way and celebrate everyone? So as a tiny example, there's a tradition among 3 different holidays. It's kind of archaic of bringing first fruits to the temple in Jerusalem. So let's have a farmer's market for Jewish holidays. Let's have farmer's markets open to the public, which is a way of acknowledging a Jewish tradition in a way that is something everybody can enjoy. There's it's a tradition practiced by very few, to cut your hair only on one holiday between Passover and the next holiday of Shavuot. There's a little tradition of you don't cut your hair except on this one holiday of Lag BaOmer, that little boys, traditional Jewish boys, get their hair cut at 3 on this holiday. So I invited in, do you know what Locks for Love is? Cut your hair for people with cancer. So if it's a tradition to cut your hair, then let's cut our hair for Locks for Love. If it's a tradition to cut 3-year-old boys' hair, then let's cut our hair for children, for Locks for Love for children with cancer. That how do you use Jewish tradition in an open and pluralistic way? So I imagine Jewish life there being celebratory and open and interpreted in ways that are inviting to all.
Carole, that's beautiful, and I think there's a lot of, I can't wait to talk later, because what I heard is this, it's rooted in healing, it's rooted in, the work is rooted in healing and repurposing the space, but also, preserving history, uplifting culture and joy, but also what you just said, meeting people's material needs, right? Using, making it clear the shared values of the culture align with our needs as human beings. And so I maybe, it takes a minute, I'm putting all this stuff together, so I may be a little circular, and I just wanna make sure I'm clear on how, because I think these are great ideas, how has the community been involved in conversations about what that looks like? Because I think, are the ideas you shared with us from the community, or are they like, well, these are just ideas I would like to see happen, So like, how is that? Is it, just curious.
Are you on my board? So, because again, that's critical, that they're not just ideas that spring from my head, like this will be good, but that they bubble up from the community. So yes, those things I said came from me, but it can't stop there, obviously. I do actually want to talk about our board for a minute, because the board of the institution is new. They've been together for just not quite 18 months yet. We seated our first board, and in a not-for-profit in the United States, a board is critical. And this board is, 40% of the board are not Jewish. The board is not all white, the board is not all straight, the board is not all young, the board is not all old. It is a tremendously diverse board, and the hope is that the board represents what the institution we're building is. And when we've asked people if they would like to be on the board, and they tend to say yes with honor, and when I've asked members of the community who are not Jewish, and I think you could walk away from this, like, you have a lovely life, you don't need this. Why are you joining our board? And they always say some version of, when my children ask me, what did I do when people were mean to our friends? What did I do? I have to show my children and my community how we work together. So and I've worked in the Jewish communal space for decades. I've never seen a board like this. Anything else? Okay, here, let's check my time. I'm okay. Get this right this time. These are more images of the building. Oops. Oh, there we go. And we're about to start building. So this that you're seeing is it's not fantasy. I mean, we're at design to build now. And this space here is when you walk in through what we now need are security doors, of course. So once you make it through the security doors, where you can buy little things in the shop, get a ticket, and go into a social hall. This is the atrium that connects the buildings. We're building a 340-seat theater that will also serve as a sanctuary, a social hall that will be used for all sorts of multi-use activities, and a museum that is the first museum ever that looks at the history of anti-Semitism in America and identity-based hate. What are the roots of anti-Semitism? It didn't start on October 27th. And where are we now? And how do we show people what's the one act, anything we can all do to move from bystander to upstander? You know, even a 6-year-old can be taught to stand up to bullying. So the museum is a critical part of what we're doing and a critical driver for the audience that will be coming. And education, and this is more, which I shared with you about the memorial. The memorialization working group are the group of family members that have been working with them. Who's our audience for the memorial? So, and the museum. So I hope that the museum will have an audience of law enforcement, mayors, elected officials, students, 4th grade, 9 years old through 12th grade, university students, graduate school students, professors who can use the museum as a space of learning. And some of the conversations that we've all been having, this is a physical space where those things can happen. Again, who do we assume will be coming to the museum? And we're not going to be open for 2.5 years, so what do we do in those 2.5 years? We now have a traveling exhibition about the Tree of Life, and it's a little, like a small example of what the museum might encompass. So it opened at the University of Pittsburgh about 2 months ago. It's now in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's going to New York in September, and other places around the United States. So, in the weeks, days, months, and even now after the shooting, people came and left objects, which is probably something we're all familiar with, to bring a bouquet of flowers, but there were tens of thousands of objects left outside of the synagogue. Unbelievable, beautiful things, that stones with paintings on them, embroidery, ceramics, teddy bears with letters, like from a little boy in Tennessee. You must feel very sad, and when I'm sad, I want to hug my teddy bear, so I'm sending it to you. Tens of thousands of objects. And they all now live in an archive, which is the archive of the Heinz History Center, a big museum in Pittsburgh. And one of the questions that we're grappling with is, which objects do we show in the museum? So I brought a small exhibition to Washington, D.C., to the Capitol, and I brought an object, which is a prayer book that had been shot through with a bullet hole. Very impactful. I wanted members of Congress and the Senate to see what hate looks like. This is what it looks like. When people are shot in the act of worshiping, regardless of their religion, this is what hate looks like. Then we went to open the exhibit in Pittsburgh. I was asked not to show that prayer book, that it would be far too difficult for the community that are still traumatized to see that. So what we did is bring together over a period of many weeks a group of volunteers to come and look at all the objects together, and together help us make choices about what we should and could show. Any questions or?
Carole, thank you so much. I cannot imagine how much work, you gave a little bit of an insight how much work this must have been, and now you have this all together. It's just amazing to see. I was wondering what was the process behind the choice of the topic for the museum? So these continuities of anti-Semitism, as we call it in German. I don't know if that's the term you would use for that too. Since you said it's the first time ever that's the focus in a museum in the U.S., who was involved in the choice of the topic? Was it you who chose it again, or was it the community? And why is it that focus?
So when I was hired, they had made a decision that they wanted to do a museum looking at anti-Semitism. But I don't think there was a real understanding of what that should or could look like. And one of the first things I did when I arrived was to put together an academic advisory committee, a group of people who work on history, memory, and museums. One of them you heard from last night, Eric Ward, is on our advisory committee. He's been a wonderful and critical voice. By critical, I don't mean criticizing. Important voice. One of them is a woman named Alice Greenwald, who was the founding CEO and president of the 9/11 Museum. Other people like that, historians who their life work is about history, memory, memorial. One of them is a gentleman named James Young, who was very involved actually in the selection of the Peter Eisenman Memorial here, and works on history, memory, memorial. So I've surrounded myself with people who know more than I do, which is generally speaking a good idea. And together we're really noodling through. One of them is a woman named Barbara Kirshenblatt-Gimlet, who was responsible for curating in Warsaw, so who is also an old friend. This is an example of where age has been on my side, because if you've been around a long time, you've developed some good friends along the way, and they've been very, very willing to work together. One of them is somebody, some of you in Berlin may have had the opportunity to meet Jeremy Zakharov, who was the Israel ambassador, the German ambassador from Israel. How do you say that? Yes, he was the Israeli ambassador to Germany not long ago. So he's also on our academic advisory committee, very thoughtful about all of this. So and we've changed our direction from the time we started and made a decision to ground it in Pittsburgh. Because at the very beginning it was about America. Well, that's really big, and it also negates the voice of the community. So how do you tell big stories through small stories? And we have this problem of how do you create a museum looking at anti-Semitism and a synagogue sitting side by side. And we changed the design of the building in some regard to accommodate that as well. Yeah.
That was good. How do you tell big stories and small stories? I'm grappling with several things, and I don't know if there's a resolve for sure, but several things about something you mentioned about about who you envision the museum would attend the museum, and I think all of those boxes make sense to me in terms of like government officials and educators and students and all those things. But I've also been grappling with something Aisha said yesterday to me directly, and she was saying, and I think she was saying it in a through praise or like in a lauding the U.S. But she was saying that the movement is so professional in America, and I know she meant that as a compliment, but it's been sticking with me. So, and I hear you say the list of organizations and people that you expect to come. That's the same list I've expected to come to museums I've worked with. But what I didn't hear were the everyday people, the blue collar workers and just everyday people, right? And so when I think about who might have, I don't know the full story and I should learn it, but who might have, a lot of times the people who operate within the ignorance to create, to operate within this hate, they are not a lot of times they're not connected to those groups. And just one more piece to that, it made me think about some of the communities, we faced early on about but this will take from something else. Operating from a place of lack, but I also, being in community, know that when you hear that, you might be dealing with a community that's dealing with lack, right, in their community. So they're voicing their lived experience. So I'll be working with I balance these same things, and I'm just thinking about, like, when we say it's a place for people to learn and educate, and does that create a bubble where we leave out people who also need to be able to have a space to have their needs met as well, that in a way that may not be as tangible in a museum. I think you addressed it with some of the programming ideas, and I know it's a complex question too, so.
So I didn't plant you there. And my work has evolved in the time that I've been here, very much in response to, I think, what you're talking about. And I want to try to explain in a way that makes sense. Obviously, all of America is not the same, and cities with a lot of resources look really different than cities where the resources have dried up. And there are many towns and cities across the United States that are struggling with economic disparity. We're in Western Pennsylvania. Within 20 miles of where this sits are communities and towns where the economy has rolled up, where the opportunities that once existed are not there. And I think perhaps we might all be able to agree that hate grows where opportunity is diminished. When the economy is at risk, hate grows. And I've recently been spending a fair amount of time in small towns in the United States, in Morgantown, West Virginia, in Youngstown, Ohio, in places where you once could be guaranteed a place in the factory, in the company, a pension. You could take your family out to dinner on a Saturday night. You could buy a home. It's gone. And I think there are really complicated issues around hate and anti-Semitism, because we see the rise of anti-Semitism in elite colleges. It's not the same. These people in Morgantown, West Virginia, they don't care about Gaza. They're not protesting in the library at Columbia University. I'm not advocating for anti-Semitism, believe me, but you can understand where the roots come from when you have nothing and you're looking for a scapegoat. That is not the same anti-Semitism that's coming from the left. And I could not agree more with you that our work has to be rooted community to community, town to town, in some of these cities, communities, towns that have the least. And that's where hate bubbles up. Or that's certainly what I'm seeing. So we've also tried, because these objects were left by people from all over the country, when the exhibit travels to different cities, to bring back the objects that their city sent. So it's now in Cleveland, and the objects are very different than the ones that were in Pittsburgh, because we sent objects that were sent from their community. There's me, I had to make sure I wore a different dress today, so you know I have more than my dress. And what are we doing to kind of get this word out? It's great to be here. Last summer was at the Aspen Ideas Festival, speaking on a panel with, that's Darren Walker. He's the president and CEO of the Ford Foundation and has been a wonderful, wonderful advocate and funder for the work that we're doing. Henry Ford, of course, was famous for distributing the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and was a renowned anti-Semite. So I have to say that I really love that a gay black man and a Jewish woman are there spending Ford money. So I sort of celebrate that. And again, who our core audience is, how do we address the different work that we're doing? This kind of work, public dialogues. And you asked about the Center for Jewish Life. This was our groundbreaking when we did the demolition, and there are clergy from every faith up on the stage together. So I sort of hold on to that as this is what we hope we are creating. And really I'm getting to the end here, the kinds of public programs that we're doing now before we open. One was a concert with music of resilience, but what I want to point out most significantly is there is a group, Remember, Educate, and Combat Hate, the REACH group, and they are here. And they're more than this is a sampling, who have been out speaking. They are family members and survivors, and they are eager to use their own voice and to come to Germany, to go to New York, to go to Florida, to go anywhere where there's a willing audience to hear. And what they most want you to know is when you send that letter, when you send that teddy bear, when you send that stone, we're not anonymous. This is us. And if you ever have the impulse to do something when you hear about a tragedy, do it. Andrea Wedner, who is, here, I'll point out to her. This is Andrea. She's a survivor, and she's the one who was next to her mother when they pulled her out, knowing she was never gonna see her mother again. And she was in the hospital for months. By the way, it was Trump's first administration, and he wanted to come and see her in the hospital, and she was like, yeah, no. So, you may be the president, but I'm the boss of this room.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she is the person who said to me, I walked out alive, I'm gonna walk back in alive. She wants to use her voice everywhere she can. And it's her niece with the long hair sitting next to her. I mean, they don't want to be anonymous. They want their voices heard. So we've been sending them out to speak wherever we can. You'd think I would get this right, but no. There we go. Okay, so that's our board. You don't need to remember their names. But the Academic Advisory Committee, I will just share with you if that's okay, because this is not a singular, Carole Zawatsky is going to do this. So Barbara Burston is a local historian who's really focused on Pittsburgh history. Abe Foxman is the former director of the Anti-Defamation League, so he's sort of an interesting advisor around the rise of anti-Semitism and hate. Daniel Green is someone who just curated an exhibition called The Holocaust in America. Alice Greenwald, I mentioned to you. Jeremy Zakharov is the former ambassador of Israel to Germany. Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet, I think you may know her, right? Yeah, so she's working with us. Scott Miller is the individual I called and said, you gotta come to Pittsburgh and see what I've just seen, because it's devastating, and helped me make decisions about what to do. Pam Nadell has a new book coming out called Anti-Semitism, an American Tradition, sadly. Yolanda Savage Narva is a Jew of color who has a wonderful, wonderful voice in helping us think about audiences and resonance and the broad picture. Amy Spitolnik was a Berlin Fellow 2 years ago, right?
Correct.
She works for JCPA. We all know Eric Ward and James Young, who is the person who works on Memorial. So certainly by no means do I do this alone. You do not need to see the slide of how to give money. We can turn this off. And I finished early, but I'm only one person. So if there are other comments, questions, anything you'd like to know, or you just want to have a break because we finished early, that's great too. I won't be offended.
No, please. We have another 10 minutes. So.
No, I'm not gonna take this. I just wanna say thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
I was just at your presentation.
Sorry.
Okay, Rebecca.
All right, sorry. I noticed that I think there are a few slides that talk about core audiences, and I know you started to talk about this a little bit. This one actually does say Jewish families. There was another slide that it started with like law enforcement and had some other community groups. I know since this is new to a lot of us, I'd love to hear how you're thinking about different visitor experiences and how you're balancing how much backstory, how much information when you're looking at putting together the memorial, the head and the heart.
Yeah, so we're just beginning to work on curriculum material. I've actually had a few conversations with Facing History about the potential of partnering. We do have an education initiative that is already in motion that works with schools, and just like bringing in the academic advisory committee to work on the content, sort of the next level is now to put together a group of people who begin to work on what is the visitor experience for each of those audiences. You had a question? Or you're just trying to help me out?
I just wanted to sort of ask something. Okay. I'm trying to, there's so many museums and memorials around the topic.
Actually, there are not.
Well, okay, sorry, I mean sort of dealing with the topic of the Holocaust. I used to work for the Shore Foundation, and so we collected testimonies of the Holocaust. We did also interviews with some of the survivors of the Pittsburgh Tree of Life incident. What I mean to say is, how do we do things differently? Because it feels like what we've done in the past, and I'm just gonna say it out loud, safe space.
Has it worked?
Has it worked? And I feel like results are pretty, dim.
But we don't know that.
Right.
Because what we'll never know is if they hadn't existed. So we only know that anti-Semitism has continued to rise. What we don't know is what if we did nothing? And if any of us actually had the answer to end racism, xenophobia, LGBTQ, how great would that be? And I think often about the quote from the Talmud, from Jewish text, it is not our job to finish the job, but nor can we desist. And absolutely, I sometimes feel like I'm trying to clean out the ocean with a little teaspoon. This feels futile. There's another shooting. It's clearly not working. But it's also not the right answer to say it's not working, so let's stop. And I certainly understand, but this is actually, there are a lot of people looking toward us to make this happen, because on sites of mass shooting in the United States, there has been no institution that's rebuilt. And so to rebuild a space of joy, and I hope that that's one of the answers, that we don't let the story end with how were we killed. And the very beginning of Holocaust scholarship was very much about the mechanism by which we were killed. And in fact, the Holocaust Museum Library did not collect books in the language of the victim, only in the language of the perpetrator. So I hope we have learned something, and we just have to keep trying.
That's what I was trying to get to. I'm with you in a sense of, you don't give up and you rebuild and you're resilient and we try to learn from something. But it's kind of like, is there a different way of thinking about it? I know nobody's found these secret sauces in the United States, right? To how to deal with all of these issues.
How to combat human nature.
Yes.
And fear of the other.
And how do we counter it?
And how do we counter it?
And
You know,
not give up. I get all of that, believe me. I'm just trying to, I was just thinking, was there some thinking about, this is how we've done things in the past, and I know Facing History is Shore Foundation, maybe on Yad Vashem, when we put that together, there's lots of programs, but the question is how do we not—
is it gonna work?
Yeah, how do we not continue the same thing? Kind of feeling like, is it really really making progress? Yes. If we didn't do anything, would there be other genocides?
We don't know. You know, during the years that I worked at the Holocaust Museum, my portfolio was not a particularly happy portfolio. I looked at the Holocaust, genocide, and human rights violations. And, you know, every day I would look and say, well, which folder should I look at today? Pol Pot, you know, and you can very easily say, oh my God, you know, this world is not getting any better. It was, you know, Rwanda, you know, which one of these folders has a happy story? When are we going to learn? Is it working? And I can only say that we have to persist in our work. We cannot give in to defeat. And I mean, you hope that we continue to refine the way that we think about it, that we have open and honest conversations, that we put joy together with tragedy, and do the best that we can. But you're asking a really important question. I don't know if any of you have ever read Gary Shtengart's book, Absurdistan.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how did you get to write that and not me? It's so, like, I'm a little jealous that you wrote that. And it asks all the questions that you're asking, and they're the right questions. And the answer is we don't give up. Anything else? You know, when I was bringing the exhibit to Cleveland, so I was actually the founding director of the Maltz Museum, and I was bringing the exhibit, and somebody said to me, "This is a really sad story. Do you have anything happy you can add to it?" And I'm like, "Well, no, not really." But I did say to them, "You have a collection of Judaica. You have a collection of gorgeous objects. Why don't you exhibit them alongside this to show a broader swath of what Jews look like?" So does anybody have something happy? It's great to be together. Thank you.